Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List Unplugged. Here for another installment in my Hidden Gems series. I am very delighted today to be talking with my buddy Michael, whom Letterboxd knows as Off, just OFF, which is an unusual name. I don't know, Michael, if you want to explain the origins to everybody, but it is a good story. So I feel like that would be worth it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fairly fairly straightforward way that I came to the name, and that I
Yes.
discovered Letterboxd. I'd been doing sort of movie reviews for my group of friends for years. I was the guy that would always say, "Oh, I've got an opinion on this movie. I'm going to get it written down and share it with you all." And then I thought, well, I'll just use this site to log it. And then I realised, oh,
Hmm.
you actually need a username. And I went, well, I gave a 2-word response. The second word was off, and then I thought, oh, that'll do, off. And then I haven't changed it for however many years. So
Yeah, he was very annoyed, shall we say, that he had to create a handle, and he was like, "Ah,
I was in a bit
off."
dyspeptic mood that day, so I was like, "Oh, well,"
Right.
you know.
So you just kept off.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
just kept.
it just stuck, and then I never thought of anything better, and here I am.
Here you are, all grown up. You don't know what year that was, right? That was probably what?
Some
I
time
think.
ago, I think it would have been when I'd just come back from watching Prometheus, so whenever that dropped, because I had thoughts.
Speaking of Fassbender, because we've been
Mm.
talking about The Counselor and his robotic. I think you agreed with me though that he was the best thing about First Class,
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
then he does kind of have a way about him that seems he has no soul.
He does have these. I think someone called it dead shark eyes. I think is the best way I've heard it described, and that I say that as a compliment because I think it's perfect for the characters that he plays. And in Macbeth, it is
Mm,
absolutely to a T. Like him and I think it's Marion Cotillard who plays the
yes.
Lady Macbeth in that. They are both outstanding in that film. It's like they're not really even. You don't feel like you're watching someone perform. You feel like it's so intimate and close. It almost feels like you're intruding, and yeah, that's the best I've ever seen him. But I agree, he can be quite in the wrong film. I don't think he's the best.
Yeah, he shouldn't really be in like a rom-com
No, no, I definitely don't think I could.
or or, or a family film. I'm also thinking of like Shame.
Mm,
And that one he's definitely cold, but he's supposed to. So
yeah, yeah.
he's just not really warm and fuzzy, is
No,
he?
you don't get the warm fuzzies from Fassi. Definitely not. No, I think
Fassy.
he's best when he's either like he's got this side project where he does motor racing. So I think
Oh.
he's literally goes and races. I think it's touring cars, and he's
Hmm.
great in that because obviously very intense, very focused. So I think you can see that he's best when you give him a character like that, who's very intense and focused, because that I think that bleeds from his personality into the role.
Yeah. So Prometheus, yay or nay for Fassy?
For
Just out of
For
curiosity.
Fassi, yay, 100%. I think he works
Okay.
the film perfectly. I loved all the like Lawrence of Arabia throwbacks that they were doing with it. I loved they weren't
Mm.
being subtle about it. It was great. The film itself would probably an A. I don't feel as strongly about it now as I did the first time I watched it. I'm kind of like, yeah, well, the ship design's quite cool. I like some of the visuals. It's not a total write off, but like I think my things I dislike about it are the same as a lot of other people, like the flimsy characterizations, all of that stuff. But I really liked Covenant for some reason.
Hmm.
Um, Covenant did it for me because I think I wasn't taking it seriously in the same way that I was taking Prometheus seriously. So I was just able to have fun with it and just.
Yeah, that seems to be sort of the thread with Scott
Mm,
movies. Is like it for some of them. I mean, he has such a different. His filmography is so varied, but a lot of them, if you come at them too seriously, you're just going to be sorely disappointed. But if you can laugh at them,
yeah,
or with them, I should say,
because I kind of feel
it's
like
a little more fun.
he's almost laughing at the entire human race, Ridley Scott, in some of
Hmm.
his films. It feels like he exists in a bubble, like outside of humans, and he's sort of looking in through the looking glass and studying us and going, "Aren't you silly?" And I think
Mm,
that's why people complain about the characterizations in Covenant being flimsy, but I think they're
right.
supposed to be that way because that's how he views humanity, as terrifying as that. that sounds. I think that's Ridley Scott's view of us.
Yeah, and he's like an alien. I mean, anybody that would make House of Gucci, um,
Or cast Jared
really
Leto in
just
that role and go, do you know what? That take was fine, Jared. We're keeping that one in. That's good to go.
we're gonna keep going.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. More. Yeah.
madman. Okay, so I'm honored to have you here, off slash Michael, and I'm happy to know your real name now, and what you look like, because for the longest time I thought you were just like an old guy because your reviews are so wise and profound, and then I meet him, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's younger than I am, so
Oh, okay.
that's
Well, that's
always nice.
that's flattering, but yeah, I mean, I hope there's a little bit of wisdom in there, but I also hope I'm a bit
Oh, for
like
sure.
a bit of a court jester as well. I like to think
Hmm.
so. If you can come
Yeah.
away having just smiled a bit at what something I've written, then that's the thing that makes me happiest.
Yeah, so everybody follow him. Off. Okay, so Michael's picks today for his two hidden gems are very different. I don't know that we could pinpoint one thing that they have in common, which is fun. Uh but both 5 stars for you, Michael.
Hmm.
And I hadn't seen this first one, but I had seen the second, although it felt like watching a different movie the second time, which is
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
But the first one is, why don't you announce it, because I'm going to butcher this guy's last name, director's last name.
Okay. So this one is Senna,
Mhm.
which is about the Brazilian racing driver Ayrton Senna, and he is a legend of Formula One, and he basically raced throughout the 70s and the 80s. And this director, who I believe it's pronounced as if Capadia,
Capadia?
yeah. He managed to basically he did a presentation to the family of Senna, and said this is what we're going to do for the movie. It was actually an hour 40-minute presentation, something like that. So it was a substantial
Wow.
thing, and they were so confident in what he was doing, his vision. They gave him access to like home videos and personal documents that hadn't been seen before. And it gives you a picture of what Senna was like as a man, not just as a racing driver. And you get the sense of this person who was almost a mystic in a way. He was committed to his craft, and he felt he had like a communion through God in the race car, and that he had like a
Mm.
God-given right to speed. So there's a lot of ego there, but there's also a lot of humility with Senna as well as a person. So he's a very complicated character. And also the other thing that I'm interested in that film is the fact that it is all kind of existing footage. So the editing job, if you think about what the director had to go through to get that
Oh,
through,
man.
because like the amount of footage that F1 shoots, and the behind the scenes stuff, he would have to be selective. And in fact, they actually picked the director because he wasn't familiar with Senna, because they wanted a fair kind of point of view. They didn't want a hero worship. They wanted something that would tell the story properly. And I think he kind of, with one or two exceptions, I think he did a pretty good job.
Oh, for sure. And I didn't know anything about it either. So, I mean, I didn't know who Senna was either. So I was going into it completely cold. This is also made in 2010, documentary, obviously, but I think of 2010 as new, but it's not.
Yeah.
Uh, but I thought of actually OJ Made in America while I was watching this,
Hmm.
and the way that they're both sort of styled with the footage, and they have the voiceover, like a journalist reading about him, or his sister has voiceover,
Hmm.
so there is a little bit of that sort of cinematic sense that's thrust on it. But you're right, otherwise it is just basically watching things that were filmed on site.
Yeah, I mean, it's like watching history unfold in front of you rather than here's a guy in a chair. You know that it was shot all in one day with that guy, and they're just using the extracts they want for the film. It kind of makes you aware that you're watching a film. Whereas when you watch
Right.
Senna, you're quite right. There's voiceover and like explanatory stuff that goes on, but it's overlaid over footage of him driving or footage from the time. So you never feel like you're watching this stale, dusty kind of document from history playing out. You feel like you're watching actual, well, you are watching actual real life, but a lot, you actually feel it in that documentary. Whereas a lot of documentaries, the talking heads, I find, take you out of it. And I think
Right.
if you look at what happened after Senna came out, that became almost the template for documentaries going forwards. Like especially biopics, they didn't. resort to talking heads. They were like, "We're going to keep you in the moment." So I think it started a bit of a trend there.
And you find it I feel like what you love the most about this is the visceral nature of it. Like it's like so stimulating and
Mm.
exciting because
Yeah,
it
I mean,
puts you
like
there.
the engine noise, the fact that you're there with Senna, like when he messes up the lap in Monaco, you know, the soundtrack comes on and you feel his anguish, you feel like his anger with himself as he's walking back to the pits, and then you combine that with the voiceover from I think it's the team manager at the time, Ron Dennis, talking about his feeling was just pure anger. He wouldn't even come out of his motorhome for hours to speak to anyone. So you know, if you're trying to understand a sport, a good way to do it is to reverse engineer it and look at the reactions of the people taking part in the sport and how much it matters to them. And I think Senna does a really good job of that, particularly when you're looking at the rivalry between Senna and Prost. When it
Yes.
comes to that, because these are two very different men in competing in the same sport. Because Senna was, as you say, he was an emotional character. He was sensitive. You can see it in the drivers' meeting when he's validated. And something that happened that went against him the previous year, all of the drivers go, "No, that was wrong," and Senna like has to leave because it's too emotional for him. Whereas Prost is
Right.
more of this kind of calculating figure. He was known as the professor because he would do what was necessary to win a race. So I think the film tells you like if he's in fifth place and he needed the points for fifth, he wouldn't try and push for the win. So you have these two people who clash, and it is very a meeting of two worlds almost. And also, they should never have been both driving for the same team because they're both number one drivers. So
Right.
in Formula One, you need to have a number one and number two driver, and the number two driver's job is to bring home the points, but not to challenge the number one driver. Whereas Ron Dennis, who was like the team principal at McLaren, just got these two guys together and didn't think too much about it. And then he had these two guys in the same machinery at each other's throats season after season. So you could see how the rivalry and the unpleasantness kind of builds. And the film does a really good job of showing that. I think there's like a slow motion shot of Prost and Senna walking past each other and just they exchange a glance, just a look. And they do a little bit of slow mo on that look, but you can see so much antipathy that it almost takes your breath away in that one shot.
Yeah, and they were different because Senna is Brazilian and then Prost
He
was
was French.
French, right?
Yeah, and him being French
Yeah.
actually worked in his favor because the head of the governing body at the time was French, and he's
Mm.
obviously, you know, he favored Prost. It was well known. So they had he's quite a dictatorial authoritarian guy, and they had a drivers meeting where he said, "No, the best decision is my decision." And then you hear Prost go, "Well, I have a feeling about that." And then he says, "No, it's my decision, drivers vote, democratic, only the drivers." And then the drivers all vote and they pick Senna's option. And, you know, so you can see Senna's little victory in that scene. And yeah, and it's quite fun to see what he was up against in terms of the politics in the sport. So he was not just driving against rivals on the track, but he was also dealing with behind the scenes stuff. And of course, that's where
Right.
Prost was a master of that. He knew exactly how to position himself to get the right drive in the right car at the right time. Because F1 is not just about the driver; it's a continual technological war between the teams. Because the teams all build their own cars, so it's not like every driver has the same chassis. It's like a technological arms race. So if you are the best driver on the grid, but you're stuck in an absolute clapped out, you know, second rate car, you're not going to win anything. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. Um,
Moving parts.
didn't even realize what I was doing there.
Yeah, I know. I had to point it out because I knew you didn't know. I was gonna say also that if you wanted, you could really say that Senna is passion. Like
Mm,
he's not methodical in that way. Like that's what I found in their dichotomy was like Senna is he's not going to get fifth place because he can't.
yeah,
He wants to win. He's really driven. He's very hard on himself and he's there to conquer it even if it doesn't make sense for him to.
yeah.
He can't it's like he
You
can't
can't
help
stop it.
himself.
Yeah, well, in a way that
Right.
that might be a parallel between our two films, which is obsession, because there you go. You see,
Oh,
because
yeah.
Senna is obsessed with what he does, and
That's true.
it's not a want, it's a need. He has to be the fastest. He has to be number one. Like in the start of the film, when you see the Monaco GP, which is basically a nightmare for drivers. It's the most technical GP. He was flying around that race. He was, like something like 11 seconds ahead of Prost, and he didn't stop pushing, and he made a mistake. And that's what then led to obviously him going out of that race. So, like you say, he didn't know any other way. But that's why the fans
No.
loved him, because he was tremendous to watch. Like, he kept that car dancing on the edge. You can see in the footage that the car is slipping all over the place. He's throwing it into the corners. He's extracting every last second of speed out of that car as it's going. It's thrilling. It's visceral. You get the sense that he was a master like technician. He really knew what he was doing in his craft, um, and it all comes through. But you get the human side of Senna as well. It shows you that I wish they'd gone into it a bit more, but it does show his charity work that he did back in Brazil. Obviously, he had that foundation that he opened up that you learn at the end of the film is still going, and that Prost is actually a trustee. So that was nice because the two men did reconcile.
Towards the
Well,
end.
towards the end.
Well, and I was going to say too, you brought up his spirituality,
Mm,
which to me was very interesting because they didn't really delve into it too much,
no.
but I liked how he, I mean, anytime that he was speaking, where it was just Senna,
Mm,
he did bring that up and say like that, he kind of was in a different level of consciousness. The way he described it was so like how you would kind of say somebody's in the zone.
yeah,
When you're in your sort of element and you're doing what you're meant to
it's
do.
like a
That's what I got out of Senna was like that
it's like a
feeling.
flow state almost, where one action just flows into the next, and you don't have to think about it.
Yes.
And it's like
Yes, and for him that was God.
yeah,
Like it was God that was allowing it, and he was like it was like almost out of body
yeah.
where he didn't even feel like he could sort of like take in what was even happening. It was like he wasn't even there. It was beyond
It was
him.
not conscious, I think, is the way that he described it. It was like an
Right.
unconscious thing that was guiding him at that point, and it's enthralling to hear him speak because he
Yes.
clearly believes every word that he says. He clearly is a genuine, sincere guy. And at the same time, though, like there is a theory in F1 that everyone F1 champion has to discover what's called their inner. I don't know if I can I swear? It's not going to be too
Oh,
bad.
well,
Yeah,
you are, yeah, go ahead.
they have to discover their inner bastard in order to become an F1
Oh.
champion. It's the working theory, basically.
Hmm.
So that basically you get to a certain point where what you can do within the rules and within what's polite isn't enough anymore. And so you can see that happen for Senna, where he's got that race with Prost and he takes him out in the first corner, which is kind of revenge for what Prost did to him the previous year at the Japanese Grand Prix, because it's very historically very hard to pass there, and he knew he needed to be either first place or Prost not finish the race for him to be world champion. But the difference is, you see with Senna, he's really conflicted about that. Like
Right.
afterwards, you can hear like the team principal again, Ron Dennis, is talking and saying, "I don't think he felt very good about that." And you can see even when Senna's talking about what does it feel like to be the world champion, he says, "Oh, it's not a bad feeling." But the way that he says it, you can tell that maybe there is a bit of a bad feeling for him, like because he was a very moral, like decent, like person on one level. Like there's even
Right.
it's not in the documentary, but either it was a practice session or a quali session, and he jumped out of his car in the middle of that session to go and assist another driver who was injured. So this is a guy who's obviously very compassionate, but at the same time, he did discover that edge that he had to him because that competition with Prost pushed him right over the limit.
It's also very telling that towards the end when they were sort of getting rid of the part, there was something that they were getting rid of in the car
Mm.
that was making it more difficult for him, and the doctor had sort of said to Senna like maybe you should stop, like you've
Yeah,
won
come
a
fishing
bunch
with
of
me
these.
is what he said. Let's go
Yeah.
all together. Come fishing with me.
And then Senna said, like, "I can't stop."
Mm.
And so to me, that's the other tie-in with the obsession part where it's like, even if he even no matter how much he won, he said, like, winning is a drug. I mean, he himself said that.
Yeah,
So it's like, that feeling of like you wish that you were so the best at something so that you could understand that high, but then
Yeah,
at the same time, you're like,
it's scary
if you
because
felt that high,
mm,
it's scary because you couldn't just do normal things. Like, how could you get in the car and drive somewhere when you're used to being on that level? And
yeah.
that's so fascinating to contemplate,
Yeah,
you
I
know, when
mean
you think about
to be an
that.
F1 world champion, it means you are literally you have climbed the summit of motorsport. You are someone
Right.
who's raced the most difficult, most technical circuits. You have made sure that you're in the right team. You've made sure that you're communicating with your engineers properly because the driver's job in F1 is highly technical as well. So they have to give the feedback to the team. And Senna
Right.
was great at that as well. But I think what comes through to me in that documentary is just the fact that he did not know any other way. As we keep coming back to, he was just number one, or like there's that famous quote about him, which is that if you no longer go for a gap that's there, you're no longer a racing driver. We're talking
Mm,
about overtaking, and I think although he's using that to try and justify a pretty bad move that he made at the time, I think it does capture the spirit of him as a driver, that he was for taking risks, for pushing things to the limit. And I guess unfortunately at a certain point, and it wasn't even his fault, but at a certain point his luck did run
run
out.
out.
Which
So Michael, why do you think before we go on to Duke,
mm,
why do you think this is an underseen film? Like, I know it's a hidden gem because I had never heard of it, but like, well, not that I'm like the definitive, but
yeah,
what do you why is it not more popular in your opinion? Like, why aren't people seeing this?
I would say it's about a sport which doesn't have that big a reach in the US, or at least it didn't have at the time when Senna was driving. Like there were very
Okay.
good US commentators working for ESPN at the time who were popularizing the sport, but even now with like Netflix and Drive to Survive, what it is now at the moment in the US is much much bigger than then. So it's about a figure who's largely unknown outside of like Europe, and obviously South
Right.
America. And also it's a documentary as well, which again that can be a bit of a hard sell if you're doing a documentary, especially a biopic about someone who's not well known outside of their regions and territories. So I think that's one of the reasons. But other than that, I think it did quite well for a documentary. It did. It had a really good opening in the UK. It got a theatrical release in the US as well, which for a documentary about someone who's unknown outside of their territories is pretty damn good. But I think more people should see it because if you're wondering what F1's about, this is actually a better film, I would say, than Rush or any of the other F1 narrative dramas that are out there that will tell you, like I said, reverse engineer it. This is what it means to the people competing in the sport. Go and see it. That's what I'd say.
Great pitch. You did it for me. Go see it. Plain and simple, sweet, simple and sweet. Okay, so that's Senna. And Michael's second pick is very different, although apt about obsession. It is The Duke of Burgundy, directed by Peter Strickland from 2014. Although it looks like I don't know what year it looks like it was made in, but uh, definitely not 2014. But Michael, how would you describe this film to someone who's never seen it? I'm curious.
I would say, I mean, first of all, I would say it's got a 70s vibe in terms of the visual.
Okay,
I know that
the music.
the director said, I think it was a guy called Jess Franco who released a number of films back in that decade that was an inspiration, and also I think the Giallo films as well. He cribbed quite a lot from
Giallo.
Giallo.
I
Um,
have to say it like that every time. Go ahead.
and he's I would say it's a visual treat. Like when you start that film, you've got like the sounds of nature all around the main character. It's almost like an ASMR kind of experience. And again, you're being as the
Dream.
director is trying to trigger you in, this is a sensual experience, and you get those lovely freeze frames while she's cycling to basically to their place of residence. I would say it's a visual treat. It's full of dissolves. It's full of wonderful camera work. Um, it's full of Baroque kind of set design. Even though they used a real house, they decorated it in a very wonderfully ornate fashion. So I would say that the director is almost trying to hypnotize you and trying to put you in the same state that Evelyn is in when we meet her at the start of the film, which is a realm, well, to quote another film, a realm of the senses.
Mm. Well, and this is a film basically about two women, Cynthia and Evelyn. I have my best Cynthia attire on right now because she wears a shirt in the movie that is silky and soft, and so I'm trying. Her hair is always up though, but so I'm channeling Cynthia right now. But this is a love story that is set in a world that apparently no men live in,
Hmm.
because there's no man in the movie. The Duke of Burgundy has really nothing to do with it except that it's the name of a butterfly.
Yep.
But there's no Duke, and I think that if you if you just read the title, you would think, oh, this is like a Jane Austen or
Historical.
period
Yeah.
piece of
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
kind.
No, this
So,
is, it's very much it's a two-hander between these two wonderful actresses, who are both charged with portraying an unconventional relationship. And what the
mm,
director does, what Peter Strickland does, is he basically loads his deck and he's showing you information that he wants you to see at the start of the film, but he's not showing you everything. So we don't understand the dynamic between these two people when the film starts.
right,
And it's like a
right,
dominant submissive relationship. So at first you think, well, okay, Cynthia has all of the power in that relationship. She is the sort of driving force. But as it goes on, you kind of find, well, very quickly, that Evelyn is the one who is calling the shots in a lot of ways. And in fact, that's
yes.
dispensed with pretty early on. So it's not really a spoiler to go into that because it's within the first, I'd say, what, 10 minutes that we find that out in the film, maybe quicker.
Once it comes back to the next day and they repeat the routine, I think
Yeah,
we have a pretty good sense of who is controlling who, uh, which is the person that you wouldn't
wouldn't expect.
automatically
Yeah,
assume
yeah. And
is. But yeah, I think that the first watch you are so enamored with uh, the visual, like you said, the sensory experience that it's almost difficult to focus on the actual story.
yeah,
Would you say that's true for you too?
I mean, I think it's a very different experience, like you said, on two watches. So the first watch that you have, you're taken in by Peter Strickland's visual techniques, by the sound, but my God, by that soundtrack by Cat Ears
Mm.
is so lush and sensual that, I mean, I've had it on repeat for a week. It's just been fantastic. It's this dreamy, ethereal place that you just want to live. But then when you watch it the second time, you're paying more attention to the relationship between the two main characters and the power dynamics and the way that they shift. And your heart goes out to them because they are trying. They've got, like, it's hard enough in a normal relationship, but they're trying to navigate this extra layer of frosting that they have to go through in order to try and make this thing work. And it is more complex. It is very much these two people trying to find a way to communicate. Like, I think that is part of the theme of the butterflies and the moths, is that they have almost like, I think they go into it, telepathic ways of communicating, or ways using sound frequencies where they have their own language that may not be understandable
Mm.
to anyone outside of it. And I think that is very much like what Cynthia and Evelyn are doing. They have their own language and they are communicating with each other through that. And as the film goes on, you understand it, so that you understand when that thing breaks, you understand how significant that is and what's at stake. And it's a perfect way of setting up the stakes in that film. Um, I mean, I think I saw an interview with Sid C. Knudsen. I'm going to say is the actor who plays Cynthia, and she's wonderful in real life. She's nothing like the character. She's chewing gum. She's kind of, if the question doesn't strike her the right way, she isn't playing along with the interviewer. She's very noble shit. But she is, she basically said when she read the script, what stood out to her is that you had these moments of calm in the relationship, and she said it gave her a feeling like in the pit of her stomach, like, oh no, what is going to happen next. And I think the film is very much like that, because you don't just get the dramatic peaks and troughs, you get the everyday, you get the humdrum stuff. You see the two of them when they are just in the study together, um, and then exactly that they love each other, so that what's at stake again when things start to go pear shaped. It doesn't. You know exactly what's on the line.
Well, I was going to say too, a lot of times when a relationship is portrayed in a film as incredibly specific,
Mm,
like BDSM or um lesbian in this case, where it's not necessarily something that every single person could relate to. You kind of worry about like not being able to feel the way that the characters do,
Mm,
but Strickland does this in such a way that this movie is literally about all relationships. I think I feel like what he's saying and what you are able to see, you can absolutely understand in your own personal life. And if you've ever been with anybody, especially for a long time or a good chunk of time, it's especially talking about that. Like, how do you keep passion alive in the mundane?
mm,
And that's really what I think it comes down to is if you love each other, but you have different needs and you have different preferences, and one of them, if they're hard for you to meet them, but you love each other enough to try, what does that look like?
yeah. And how does that pan out over time as well? Like,
Exactly.
because the film establishes a routine, there's an order to the world, to what's happening there, and then when obviously, my heart leapt the second time I watched it, because when I saw, I think she's credited as the carpenter when she comes in for, she's measuring up Evelyn for a very specific piece of equipment, the trunk. If anyone's
Yes.
seen it before, they'll know what I'm talking about. So the reason why I went, oh no, when I saw that scene is because I could see Evelyn becoming slightly hypnotized by the act of the measuring and by the act of planning out the trunk. And by the same token, she was associating that desire for the equipment with a desire for the carpenter. And I was like, oh, okay, this is why this is going this way. It made a lot more sense to me the second time around. I was very much in Cynthia's headspace when I was watching that scene. So I was like, oh, please don't do that. But I know that she's going to, you know.
Right.
And I think the film does a really good job. And then the other thing that I like about the film is it's got a very abstract ending. So the last 10 minutes or so, you very much go into kind of almost a dreamscape, but that is anchored by everything we've seen before. So in this one, Strickland really does make sure that you know what that abstract thing is about. You might not be able to give exact description, but you know that it's about their fears and desires about the relationship. And you go through that journey, and then he returns you again to the two characters at the end, who are both having a discussion about their relationship. And it's not like everything's fine and everything's going to be okay, but you're left with a sense, it's uncertainty, but there's also hope there. And I would take uncertainty and hope over like doom. And I think that's where the film goes. It says this isn't resolved, but they're trying, and they're going to continue to try. And I think that's what the
Yes.
last kind of look in the mirror at the end is telling you when you get that.
And I think that there's not a lot of movies that sort of address this. Oddly enough, most things are either about infatuation and the beginning of things,
Mm,
like, new romance or dating, and or they're about breakups
mm,
or the divorce, the end. So it's very rare to find something, especially this
yes.
beautifully shot and so visionary in the way the cinematography is so lush and interesting
Yep.
and odd.
There isn't a frame in that film that isn't shot in a way that you could hang it on your wall.
Mm.
Everything is, the choices are interesting. The choices serve the story. It feels like you're let into this world. You don't feel like a voyeur, which is a very, very, very difficult thing to pull off with a film like this. And Strickland, the camera tricks that he's using and the way that he draws you in, makes you feel like you're accepted into this private world, which is very different to feeling like like you're intruding or an outsider. And I think he was very deliberate in how he did that. He said in an interview like about the BDSM aspect that normally with that, the fantasy is never broken. Like if you see BDSM in a movie, you never get to see what happens when real life intrudes on it. And I
Mm.
think that was one of the things that I liked about this film, is that it's like, oh, okay, like there is the bubble and there's outside the bubble, and those two things meet sometimes.
And you also see what happens when, like, in real time, if their character breaks,
Mm.
if they break character,
Yeah.
because there's that scene where it's like she's trying to be Dom
Mm.
and she kind of slips up because she's messing up and she's like, I'm sorry, sorry, please don't get
Yeah.
mad at me. Like that sort of thing. You don't see that either.
No.
And that's just so,
Human.
you know, human.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, you did a good job, but do it this way next time.
Exactly. Yeah,
That sort of thing is
more
like,
conviction.
ah,
Like that's one of my favorite
more
scenes.
conviction.
Like
I
because
know.
it's kind of funny and it's kind of serious at the same time, and it's
And it's very sad
yeah.
at the same time because you're like, "Oh my gosh, please. That was, like, the best I could do."
Like, and the thing is, you
You
feel
know?
for Cynthia because she's like, "Oh, I really want to describe all of the ways that I love you and do all of the traditional things that you would do." And Evelyn's just like, "No, I'm all business. I want, I want in this period you to tell me what I need to achieve the result that I want." To put it politely,
Right.
and you can see
Right.
the relief on both of their faces afterwards. But Cynthia's relief is very different because it's, "Oh, thank God, I managed to navigate this situation with my girlfriend," only for Evelyn to come back and say, "More conviction next time." And she's like,
Thank you.
Okay.
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 Well, welcome to dating. Welcome to long-term relationships. They're so fun. Yeah, so I would say, not similar in the obsessive way, but
Mm,
also, uh, both Senna and Duke of Burgundy are, uh, very electric.
mm,
You can feel these are movies that you can feel,
yeah. It's a
and,
high-end atmosphere
and
in both,
they're
definitely.
stimulating picks as well, and, kind of character studies too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you find out like, the interesting thing to me about in Duke is, obviously, I think Cynthia's like a kind of scientist, right? That's what she does. I think
Mm,
it's more than a hobby, I think it is a vocation, and she's obviously quite obsessive about that, and I think maybe that obsessiveness is what attracted Evelyn to her in the first place. Um, but I think obviously when you're a scientist, there's a degree of rigor and there's a degree of being, being grown up about things. And I don't think Evelyn fully got that, when they first met. And I think Cynthia has to kind of teach her that as they go. Like there's the scene where she basically says, "Right, make me a birthday cake." And you kind of get the sense that, okay, well, now she's playing with Evelyn because she's like, "Oh, is this a new game?" And then obviously it becomes something different, but it's her way of both, getting a little bit of revenge on her, but also teaching her how to be a grown-up as well. This is what it means to care for the person that you're with. This is what it means, because you get the sense that I don't imagine Evelyn would have been making a birthday cake for Cynthia on her birthday. I don't get the
right,
sense that that's something she would have been doing. So I think there's another
right.
message being sent there in that scene. If that,
And that's the same in that scene where they're at the lecture and she tries to ask questions and they're dumb questions and it's like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. That sort of sense of being an ingenue
yeah,
and being kind of immature. But then Cynthia just loves her so much. I really think, as much as this is a movie about Evelyn and how Evelyn's kind of pulling the
mm,
strings, I think the movie itself is about Cynthia.
yeah,
And I think that we're meant to see it through her.
yeah. I think it shifts. I think we start with, like, because it's very sensory. I think we start with Evelyn's headspace, and then as the film goes on, I think you're meant to shift
Mm,
towards Cynthia's point of view because the bubble gets burst. And when reality comes flooding in, who's equipped to deal with the reality? Well, it's not Evelyn, it's Cynthia, and we see things from her
mhm.
perspective. She's getting older. She's got problems with her back. Mortality is obviously on her mind. She's, the last thing she wants when she's sat in bed is another scenario that she has to play out. It's like, come on, read the room, understand what I'm feeling, and she,
I just want to wear my pajamas right
yeah,
now. I
exactly.
just want to be
You
comfy.
don't. Sometimes you don't want to get all dressy. Sometimes you just want to feel comfortable in your own in your own pajamas, and like everyone
Right.
doesn't get that. So I think when you get to the end scene, it is a major breakthrough for Evelyn when she says to Cynthia, okay, if it's making you feel like this way, because she really begins to understand. She begins to empathize with Cynthia because you get that abstract sequence where they both kind of go into each other's thoughts and feelings, and after that, that's when they have the chat. The only thing that I would
Right.
say is, like, obviously Cynthia's completely devastated at that point because she doesn't know if she can fully trust what Evelyn's saying. Because, like, even if Evelyn's being sincere, that need isn't going anywhere. So they're going to have to
I
find
know.
ways in the future of managing that. So that's
Right.
why it's not. That's why I like the ending, because it's not a deliberate downer, but there is the uncertainty, but with a dash of hope. and I'll take that. Like I said, I'll definitely take that.
Take that over Doom any
Oh
day.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh, well, I am going to end this by pulling up. I know not everybody watches video, but this is the book that I've been basing the series off of, the best film that you've never seen. And this week, my pick was Ugetsu, which is a Japanese film by Mizoguchi. I'm just going to say it like that, even though it's not Italian, it's Japanese. The director who recommended that one is Kimberly Pierce, who did Boys Don't Cry and the remake of Carrie. It is described as a ghost story. It's not one that I am crazy about, but cinephiles love it. So I don't know how much of this is really a hidden gem, which keeps being the case for our cinephile crowd, but it would be for the average person, I
So
would think.
tell me what the average man on the street would get out of this film then. Like if you had to pitch it to me.
Oh my gosh. Um wow. Michael, that is a hard one. I don't know that the average person would. I mean, if they were seeking it out, I'd be like, have you even ever seen anything that's Japanese, first of
Mm,
all? Because that's a whole thing. And usually Japanese cinema is associated with like samurai, um, or something, I mean, anime.
mhm.
But whereas this one is kind of like a dreamy movie where it's like working class people and it's kind of horror, like
Okay.
folklore, folk tale sort of thing. Uh, and there's shenanigans that go on uh, affair wise with this married couple, but then there's spooky stuff.
Okay.
So it's very atmospheric, but I didn't get drawn into the world as much as most people
Mm.
do, it seems.
Well, I mean, the thing
But
with these lists is like they're not an absolute cast iron. Like you will love everything on this. I mean, I remember getting like 1,001 movies to see before you die. I don't know if you've heard
oh
of that
yeah,
one. Like
I've seen that before.
that's like a quite I guess quite a morbid way of looking at film watching. But like there's stuff in there that I watched that I was like I don't know why I went through. Like I think I saw The Parallax View, which is like a 70s
Hmm.
paranoid conspiracy thriller. It
Yeah.
absolutely did nothing for me. Like I actually love films like that, but The Parallax View just completely turned me off. Didn't like the lead character, found him obnoxious. Got the message, got the visual metaphors that they were laying out. Didn't think it was great. I love that whole 70s paranoid cinema. So I was like, great, this is going to be good. The only scene that got me was they have like the head-on thing where he sits down in front of the cinema screen. And he's played images that are supposed to kind of either brainwash him or allow the shady figures to figure out what his psychology is like, so they know whether they
Mm.
can manipulate him or not. That was great. It was a great, fantastic edited scene. But as I say, this was in that book, and it's like, well, you know, you're going to have some misses.
Didn't do anything
No.
for you. Yeah, most of these, I'm getting to the point where, like, I haven't seen them, where these have all been rewatches so
Mm.
far, but once I get to the level where I'm gonna have to start fresh, I think there is a chance that I might like less than not, but at the same time, I like the idea behind this, which is talking to people about what they're enthusiastic about. What did they love about it? And trying to see that when you go into it. Just like with these, with Senna and Duke of Burgundy, if you're listening to us right now, go into it remembering what Michael loves and kind of try to see it in addition to your own
Mm.
eyes with the observations and analysis that you had.
And that's what's so great about like reading other people's reviews on Letterboxd, because I get more sometimes out of reading someone's review who has the opposite opinion to me, because I'll be like, oh, okay, I'm maybe there's something I missed, or maybe there's an aspect of the film that I've overlooked, or oh, okay, I just felt differently about it, and this is the reason. So there's an element of like self discovery that goes along with that as well, which is pretty cool.
And it's kind of cool too when you go into something where it's the opposite, where you don't like something and then you read a review that's just exceptional and you're like, wow, I didn't like I'm going to think about this differently now. Like it literally can change your
Yeah,
mind
yeah,
or it can open something up to you, especially if you can talk directly to the person who wrote it, which is what's so cool about this. And be like, wow, like what else did you see? And then
And then that's a
So
whole
yeah,
other,
you're right.
that's a
It
whole other
enhances
trail,
it.
isn't it? That's a whole other, like, breadcrumb trail to another movie and another movie. And
Oh yeah, of course. My recommendation watch list is so large that I think that it's going to just internally combust at some point. Like
mm,
it's going to be like, "All right, Amy, you can't add anymore.
you did four, and
You've reached
you
capacity."
did 8.5 recently, didn't you, by Fellini?
Yeah.
And I've got mad respect to you for watching that, because I've tried 4 times now, have not got through it.
Oh,
I
Michael.
haven't, honestly. So, like, I worship at your altar for doing that one.
My my buddy Jerry just saw it and he gave it low as well and I it felt cathartic. I didn't even read his review yet to feel better. Just to
It's the
see,
score.
you know, the score because you're like you feel so alone with some of
Hmm.
these films, especially Fellini and oh man, French New Wave stuff is never
Yeah.
good for
Oh,
me.
you might want
Um
to try Agnes. Oh goodness, what's her name? Agnes Berda. She did this film.
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Have you seen the Cleo from Cleo? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Cleo.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was Lau's pick. I think that was episode 2 that Lau was on, and we talked about he picked Cleo from 5 to 7 as his, like, number 1
Yeah,
pick. Yeah, that's definitely a hidden
that one
gem
is. That
too.
one's like the French New Wave film that you give to someone who doesn't like French New Wave.
Like French New Wave. Michael, same page.
It's like the
Same
jump cuts are
page.
there, but they're not, as obnoxiously used as in some of the other ones, I think.
As Breathless, for instance. And
Mm.
we're going to end on that note just to alienate the whole population. But Michael, it's been a pleasure truly to have you. Thank you for dropping by to share with us. Everybody, please see Senna and the Duke of Burgundy, and we will see you at the movies.